The third time the gate flashed, "Access denied," I didn't cuss, cry, or even flinch. I just smiled like a man watching the trapdoor swing shut under someone else's feet. From the speaker, Patricia's voice came syrupy and smug. "This is private property now. Please leave immediately." I didn't move. The residents behind her, those polite little paper dolls from the Oak Trace subdivision, waited for me to throw a tantrum. But tantrums are for amateurs. I simply reached down into the passenger seat and opened a small wooden box I'd kept hidden under a winter blanket for 6 months. Because today wasn't about noise, it was about precision. I hadn't come to argue, I'd come to activate a counterstrike they'd never see coming. They'd thought that gate belonged to them. Joke's on them. It was mine, too. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this HOA madness travels. And if you love true feeling stories with just enough chaos, a splash of justice, and neighbors who seriously need hobbies, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story, let's just say, the HOA won't know what hit him. And neither will you. 6 months earlier, none of this existed. No gate, no HOA drama, no sneaky development plots, just me, my dog Tucker, and 5 acres of honest Texas dirt. The eastern fence line ran up against a sea of copy-paste homes with lawns so perfectly manicured it looked like a golf course had mated with a spreadsheet. Oak Trace was built 5 years ago by people allergic to authenticity. Me, I'm Calder Morgan, 58 years old, retired land surveyor, widower, keeper of weeds and memories. After I bought this place after my wife, Elise, and I decided to chase a quieter dream after I left my job at Patterson & Wells Construction. She passed 2 years ago, cancer, fast and unfair. But this land was ours, and staying here felt like keeping one foot in the life we'd promised each other. Until one fall morning, I was hammering a few fresh planks into that same eastern fence, and my phone buzzed with an email titled, "Urgent update regarding shared road access." The phrase, "shared road," made my stomach twist. I opened the email with dirt still under my nails and read a new list of HOA regulations that sounded like they were written by a lawyer with a God complex. They were installing an electronic gate to enhance community security and preserve property value. Except this so-called shared road, it ran straight through my land, on my deed, in black and white, notarized and county stamped. The HOA didn't own it. They just used it. Like a freeloader squatting in your guest house and trying to change the locks. I immediately called Ray Duggan, my closest neighbor and one of the few men I trust in this zip code. Retired fire chief, truck mechanic, and lifelong detector of BS. Within the hour, Ray was on my porch, Coors in hand, muttering, "This ain't about security, Cal, it's about real estate. Word is, Veritan Group's looking to buy up land for a high-end retail complex, and guess whose ranch is the missing puzzle piece?" I sat back in my porch chair, felt the air go still. For years, Patricia Markham, the HOA president with a heart full of plastic and a calendar full of neighborhood violations, had filed complaints against me like it was her cardio. My chickens were unsanitary, my tomatoes were unsightly, and my truck was apparently a national emergency every time it parked within sight of her begonias. I figured she just hated the way I lived. Turns out she hated how inconvenient my land was to her long game. One stretch of gravel road stood between her and a shiny ribbon-cutting ceremony. That night, I pulled every deed, survey, and transaction record I had. My kitchen table turned into a battlefield of blueprints and boundary lines. It took me 3 hours, 2 cold coffees, and a flashlight to confirm what I had once skimmed in a rush. The road in question wasn't just mine. It was covered by a historical easement, written in the type of legal English that sounds like Shakespeare after 2 bourbons, but essentially meant they couldn't change squat without my signature. That changed everything. This wasn't a sad old man clinging to his land anymore. This was a man sitting on a legal landmine, so I called an attorney. Sandra Liu, sharp as a tack and polite as a sermon. She looked over the papers and blinked twice. "You're not just the property owner, Mr. Morgan. You're the gatekeeper, literally. They can't block you out, but you could block them in." I didn't smile, not right away. I just leaned back and let the weight of that sentence settle in. Elise used to say bullies fold when you force them to play fair. Patricia had just stepped into a game she thought she was rigging. She didn't know I wasn't her target. I was the terrain. The one thing they couldn't bulldoze or bluff. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found that night. I just slid the key evidence into a box, tucked it under a blanket in the cab of my truck, and waited for the gate to go up, because sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to let them finish writing the test. You ever walk into a room and know, without a single soul saying it, that you're not just unwelcome, you're the conversation they were having before you walked in? That's exactly how it felt when I stepped into the Oak Trace Community Center for the first time in 2 years. The overhead lights were a little too bright, the air smelled like cinnamon air freshener and strategy, and half the heads in the room turned like they'd just seen a ghost with a clip. But I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to listen. Because when someone builds a gate on your land and acts like you're trespassing, you stop trimming your hedges and start sharpening your memory. And trust me, I remember everything. I took a seat in the back row like a man who came to church but doesn't need saving. Patricia Markham stood at the front like a game show host who already knew the winners, hair perfect, blazers screaming authority, voice dipped in fake honey. She started rambling about modernizing security infrastructure and improving access flow for community safety. That's HOA for we're building a gate so we can choose who gets in and who stays out. I noticed how she glanced over at me, quick, like a poker player, checking her chips. She didn't expect me to show, and she definitely didn't expect me to look so damn calm. That's the thing about people who love control. They get nervous when the person they thought was folding starts counting cards. And baby, I was counting. Then came the real twist. In the back corner sat a man I didn't recognize. Slick suit, posture like he'd written the meeting script himself. Greg Stanton, according to the name badge clipped to his lapel. Veritech Development. Now that name I knew. They'd been sniffing around the county commission talking about revitalizing underutilized parcels. I didn't realize until that moment that I was the underutilized parcel. I watched Greg lean over and whisper something to Patricia. She smiled like they shared a secret dessert. That's when I realized this wasn't about one gate. This was a play. High stakes, slow burn. And they thought I was just the guy still fixing his fence while they drew up blueprints behind my back. At the end of the meeting, while Patricia fake laughed through the landscaping report, a board member I barely knew brushed past my chair. Robert Klein. Gray hair, quiet eyes, not one for drama. As he passed, he murmured just loud enough for me to catch it. "You should be careful. They're targeting you." Then he kept walking, like nothing happened. I sat there, heart steady, but my mind running faster than a rumor at a bake sale. Patricia had smiled too easily. Greg had stayed too quiet. And now, a man who owed me nothing just confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup, and I wasn't going to wait around and see how the next card got played. That night, I sat back down at my kitchen table, same one Elise and I used to eat pancakes and plan forever. I spread out the deeds again, this time with fresh eyes and a pen in my hand. The boundary maps weren't just lines, they were shields. The language wasn't just legal, it was ammunition. I highlighted everything tied to the access road, the easement, the transfer rights. I wasn't just a landowner now, I was the gatekeeper, the historian, the last man standing between a greedy board and the quiet little freedom we'd fought to build. They thought I'd be easy to bully. They thought wrong. And I was about to play a hand they didn't even know I was holding. Stay tuned, because the next move? I wasn't just attending meetings. I was infiltrating their game from the inside, and, let's just say, the committee they invited me onto would regret ever handing me a seat at the table. So if you think the game just started, oh no, my friend, that was just the shuffle. You haven't seen the cards I'm about to lay down, and trust me, they don't teach this kind of playbook at any HOA meeting. Next up, I join their committee with a smile and a pen. while quietly rerouting the whole deck. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to see how a quiet rancher turns the table on a power-hungry HOA, and drop a comment below if you've ever had to outsmart someone who thought they ran the neighborhood. What's coming next? Let's just say the trap gets baited. The thing about fighting quietly is folks assume you've given up. It's cute, really. The HOA thought I'd rolled over because I showed up to their meetings wearing slacks and smiling like I just wanted to get along. They thought the man fixing fence posts in dusty boots was intimidated by clipboards and committee chairs. What they didn't know was that I was digging deeper than post holes. I was digging through history, and history, bless her heart, has a way of keeping receipts when people forget who owned what. It only took one visit to Sandra Lou's office for the game to tilt. Sandra's sharp. She's one of those people who talk soft but moves paperwork like it's dynamite. I brought her every scrap of my property file. Old deeds, faded surveys, even a receipt from the last time the county had paved the access road. She didn't blink once, just slid her finger across the boundary lines, paused at a stamped clause halfway down the deed, and said, "Well, Mr. Morgan, according to this, you're not just adjacent to the road, you're the legal custodian of it. They can't change so much as a rock without your say-so." I sat back in her creaky office chair and let that sink in. Not just a landowner, a gatekeeper with proof. Now, you'd think the next move would be to march into the HAHE office like John Wayne with a file folder. But see, the best kind of win is the one they don't see coming, so I played it polite. Joined the AHE's brand new security committee with all the enthusiasm of a golden retriever at a garden party. Patricia raised one eyebrow, clearly unsure whether to be thrilled or suspicious. "Welcome aboard," she said through her teeth. I shook her hand like I didn't already have a better one waiting in my back pocket. Every committee meeting was a masterclass in misdirection. Patricia would talk about traffic flow and community optics while Greg from Veritech sat nearby pretending to care about gate colors. They treated me like the friendly fence guy who finally saw the light. What they didn't know was I'd already hired a licensed surveyor to confirm every inch of that road was on my land, and that I'd started filing paperwork with the county before their concrete. They were installing their monument to control on a foundation I legally owned. I let them build it. I even complimented the design, because when you're preparing a checkmate, you don't interrupt their chess lesson. The HOS mistake wasn't arrogance, it was assumption. They assumed that just because I didn't shout, I didn't see. That just because I nodded, I agreed. But I come from a generation that handled confrontation with calm eyes and paper trails. While they were busy voting on gate codes and neighborhood decals, I was gathering timestamps, filing quiet objections, and stitching together a case strong enough to make their entire plan buckle at the knees. Every time I smiled during those meetings, I was measuring the length of the rope they were tying around their own project. One afternoon, while the rest of the committee argued over whether the keypad should be brushed metal or matte black, I took a casual walk around the perimeter, checked the permit postings. There were none. Not a single legal notice about road modification or electrical work. That's when it hit me. They weren't just overstepping, they were skipping steps altogether. The county requires all gate installations on historic routes to go through a permitting process, but Patricia and Greg, they were moving fast and under the table. No inspections, no public records, no legal compliance, just power moves dressed up as progress. So I started documenting. Photos, time-stamped videos, eyewitness logs. Ray helped me install discrete cameras angled at the construction area. We logged every delivery truck, every work crew, every utility line they tapped without permission. And at night, I sat at my kitchen table, lined up the photos and legal documents like I was prepping for a trial. Sandra reviewed everything weekly. "You're not just gathering evidence," she said. "You're constructing a trap." I grinned. They think I'm being cooperative, but I'm just being patient. Patricia's face during meetings began to shift. At first, she thought she'd converted me, that maybe the rancher had finally accepted his place in her tidy kingdom. But eventually she noticed I wasn't just attending. I was listening, observing, asking quiet questions at just the right time. When I offered to donate $500 toward the security fund, she blinked so hard I thought she'd pulled a muscle. I handed over the check with the same smile I'd give a neighbor borrowing sugar, knowing full well that sugar was laced with strategy. Meanwhile, the surveyor's results came in, confirmed what we already knew. The HOA had no claim to the road, not partial, not shared, not even interpretive. The easement was granted for community access, yes, but any structural modification required the explicit approval of the landowner. That would be me. Sandra helped me draft an official boundary assertion which we filed with the county, under the radar. Once recorded, it meant that any future dispute about the road would reference my legal ownership first. They built the gate, assuming no one would challenge it. Now, even their paperwork pointed back to me. There's a saying about traps, that the most dangerous ones are the ones you build under your enemy's feet while they're still dancing. That's exactly what I was doing. They were so busy high-fiving each other over RFID technology and ornamental fencing, they never looked down, never stopped to ask who owned the ground they were drilling into. They planted flags in fog, not knowing I owned the sun. Their gate? Built on my bones, on my deed, on my terms. And just when they thought everything was locked tight, that's when I'd twist the key and show them the lock was mine all along. So yeah, I sat in those meetings, took notes, smiled on cue, but every word I didn't say was a brick I was quietly stacking into a wall they couldn't climb. They thought I was falling in line. Truth is, I was drawing one. And soon enough they'd realize the road they thought they owned was never theirs to pave. It was mine. Always had been. And now? Now it was time to decide what I was going to do with that power. They finally handed me my access card at the HOA office like it was a golden ticket, only it didn't unlock anything golden. No smile, no instructions, just a thin plastic rectangle and a rehearsed nod from Patricia that said, "We're being generous." The card had a little red sticker on the back, which I later learned meant limited access. That's HOA code for, "We're going to make your life harder one beep at a time." Unlike everyone else in Oak Trace who got 2 cards per household with 24/7 access, I got 1. 1 card, limited hours, no guest entry. They handed me a key that only unlocked my own cage. And they acted like they were doing me a favor. The very next morning, I tried to leave at 5:30 to take my tractor into town for a fuel refill. The gate didn't open. I waited, swiped, waited again. Red light, nothing. I pressed the intercom, and after 3 long rings, a sleepy voice came through. "Non-standard vehicle, permits required. Please return during access hours." The HOA had decided farm equipment was too disruptive for their aesthetic. My tractor was apparently a security risk, even though Greg's contractor trucks had been rolling through for weeks without question. I turned around, parked in my own driveway, and walked back inside, with my coffee gone cold and my temper doing the opposite. And you better believe I logged every minute of it. That week, the pattern started to feel like a sitcom with bad writing. Deliveries to the ranch began getting turned away at the gate. My new irrigation parts? Delayed because the driver wasn't on the approved list. My cousin's visit? Denied because his out-of-state license plate didn't meet the residential match rule. Then came the inspections. Random security checks where some clipboard-carrying volunteer walked the fence line like I'd hidden a meth lab under the compost pile. My groceries got looked over like I was smuggling contraband instead of carrots. Every denial was another brick in the wall they didn't know I was recording. Every gate malfunction, time-stamped, logged, and filed in a folder thicker than Patricia's hairspray budget. And just when I thought the pettiness had reached peak HOA, I spotted Veritex survey crew on the far west side of my land. 4 guys in bright orange vests with tripods and measuring wheels, marking lines and dropping flags like they were hosting a parade. I drove up slow and rolled down the window. "Something I can help you with?" I asked. The crew chief gave a tight smile and said they were doing preliminary land assessments for future growth corridor. I asked if they had permission to be on my property. He said, "Technically, we're on easement-adjacent buffer zones." I said, "Technically, you're on my grass." They packed up real fast after that. I made sure my cameras caught every stake they left behind. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Certified, formal, thick envelope. Inside was an offer from the HOA board. Though, let's be real, it had Patricia's perfume all over it. They wanted to extend a community partnership opportunity and buy my ranch for what they called a fair adjusted market rate, 30% below actual market value. The letter came with a smiley face brochure about future lifestyle enhancements and a veiled threat. Failure to align with evolving infrastructure may result in increased regulatory review. That's HOA speak for sell now or we'll drown you in paperwork and code violations until you do. I placed the offer right next to my irrigation permit denial and laughed for the first time in days. It wasn't a joke, but it sure deserved a punchline. See, this was never just about inconvenience. It was about eviction with a fake smile. They thought if they squeezed hard enough, I'd sell low, walk away, and watch the bulldozers erase my wife's garden from a distance. But I've lived long enough to know that pressure makes two things: diamonds and lawsuits. And I was getting ready to polish both. I hadn't just been documenting, I'd been preparing. And the funny thing about gates is, they lock both ways. Patricia had spent so much time trying to box me out, she never stopped to check who really held the hinges. Want to see what happens when the underdog stops playing defense? Stick around. The next move? It's not what they expect, and it's going to sting. So if you've ever been boxed out, worn down, or handed a courtesy notice that felt more like a slap, you'll want to be here for what happens next. Because I wasn't just collecting violations, I was stacking ammunition. And in the next part, the boardroom doesn't know it yet, but their quiet little coup, it's about to backfire in front of everyone. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to watch the trap snap shut, and drop a comment if you've ever been on the wrong side of a smug smile. Trust me, part 5 is where it all starts to unravel. When Patricia called for an urgent board meeting in the smallest room at the community center, I knew she was hoping to keep the mess quiet. Just the executive board, no residents, no questions. Just a neat little cleanup before her plans slid off the rails. What she didn't expect was me walking in with Sandra Lou, calm as a spring breeze and holding a binder thicker than a church Bible on Easter Sunday. I didn't come to argue, I came to confirm. The room went quiet, except for the tick of the fluorescent light overhead. Patricia smiled, like she still thought this was a misunderstanding, but this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. Before we begin, I said, sliding the first document across the table, I'd like to establish a few things. I laid out the certified land survey with my signature and the county stamp. The access road you gated sits entirely on my property. You've been modifying it without permit, without consent, and, most importantly, without a legal leg to stand on. Patricia scoffed, waved it off like I'd handed her a grocery list. This is old paperwork, she snapped. The HOA development plan clearly outlines jurisdiction. That's when Sandra calmly produced the updated property deed and easement agreement. Filed just 2 weeks prior, signed and sealed by the same county office, Patricia forgot to notify. I could see it, the first flicker of real fear behind her eyes. Then Robert, the silver-hated original board member, cleared his throat. I remember those development plans, he said quietly. The road was always designated as an easement. Community access, not ownership. We were supposed to maintain use, not seize control. He looked over at Patricia, his voice steady. You knew that, and you never brought it to a vote. That moment cracked the whole room open. Her authority didn't just waver, it leaked. Like a boat, she'd been bailing with excuses, and now the tide was coming in faster than she could lie. Then the door opened. Greg Stanton from Veritech walked in like he'd been texted mid-golf round. Confident, smug, ready to spin whatever PR magic he'd used in a dozen other towns. But when he saw Sandra, saw the binder, saw the documents lined up like dominoes ready to fall, he paused. His smile hesitated. Perhaps we can resolve this amicably, he offered. Development always involves negotiation. I stood and slid the cease and desist letter across the table, signed and backed by 3 violations: illegal construction, failure to notify landowners, and improper use of county infrastructure. Negotiations off the table, I said. The county inspector will be here tomorrow morning, and so will the sheriff. Patricia stood up so fast her chair nearly flipped. You can't do this! You're endangering the entire community's security. I looked her dead in the eye. You locked me out of your gate, but I hold the deed to your front door. No shouting, no threats, just truth. And a signature that mattered. Sandra handed copies of the legal complaint to each board member. Greg backed toward the door like the room had caught fire. Patricia tried to save face, sputtering about community interest and temporary oversight, but the air had shifted. You could feel it. She wasn't in charge anymore. Reality was. The one she tried to fence out with polished gates and selective rules. As Sandra and I packed up to leave, Robert placed a hand on my shoulder. You didn't just protect your land, Calder, he said. You reminded all of us what this place was supposed to stand for. And that meant more to me than any ruling or fine, because in a world full of folks chasing power, sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who own the floorboards. They laid traps. I laid foundation. And now it was time to tear down more than just a gate. Stick around, because the real rebuild starts next, and you won't believe what rises from the rubble. The morning after the cease and desist letter dropped, the gate that once blinked red at me like a digital insult sat wide open and powerless. County officials showed up right on time, clipboard, badge, hard hat, and shut the whole thing down. No permit, no inspection record, no excuse. The look on Patricia's face when she pulled up and saw the sign that read, "Private easement maintained by Calder Morgan," was worth every second of quiet planning. She stepped out of her SUV like she still believed she could talk her way out of a cliff, but the sheriff's deputy beat her to it. "Ma'am, you'll need to speak with county legal," he said without even looking up from his form. That was the last time she ever held a microphone with confidence in Oak Tree. What followed was less of a collapse and more of a controlled demolition. Residents started asking questions. Ones Patricia couldn't dodge anymore. Why was Veritex surveying our land? Why didn't we know the road wasn't ours? Why were we billed for a gate that had no legal standing? Greg Stanton vanished so fast you'd think his Audi had wings. By the end of the week, Veritex development permits were pulled pending investigation. Whispers about bribery and improper influence started bouncing off City Hall walls like echoes in a canyon. Patricia? She called for an emergency HOA re-election meeting. But this time the community showed up in full: lawn chairs, sun hats, pitchforks of the metaphorical kind. I stood at the back of the crowd in my work boots and a clean button-up, letting them speak first. It was Robert who finally stood up and said what most folks were thinking: we need leadership that serves the neighborhood, not sells it. There was a vote right then and there. Paper slips tallied in real time. Patricia was voted out, 61-4. Her closest allies looked around like they'd just realized the room was no longer there, and then something strange happened. Folks started clapping. Not like a celebration, more like a release. Like the gate coming down let more than just vehicles through. It let truth out, too. A week later, I proposed a solution. The road didn't need to be a battleground. So I offered to place the access easement into a permanent community trust, legally binding, jointly managed, with conditions: no future development without full community approval, equal access for all residents, and written protections for agricultural properties like mine. Sandra helped draft the agreement. The new board approved it unanimously. We filed it that Friday. The road wasn't just open again, it was finally shared the way it always should have been. The gate they built to block me now swings wide for everyone. Things started to shift after that, not all at once, but steadily. The barn I hadn't stepped inside since Elizabeth passed, I cleared it out, fixed the roof, and offered it as a meeting space. Potlucks, craft fairs, and even a weekly jam session started popping up like wildflowers. Turns out the same neighbors who once complained about my garden now wanted to help expand it. We built raised beds together, laid down mulch, and planted vegetables elbow to elbow. My chickens, those once labeled unsanitary nuisances, became the stars of Saturday breakfasts. Folks brought their kids to feed them, and I swear those birds have never looked so smug. And in all of this, beneath the repairs and replants, there was Elizabeth. Her rocking chair still sits on the porch, angled toward the sunset. Her garden journal, worn and dog-eared, rests on the shelf near the kitchen window. When I see folks gathered around the picnic tables, laughing over lemonade and homegrown tomatoes, I think of her. She always believed land isn't just dirt. It's memory, it's belonging. It's the one thing worth standing your ground for. We didn't just win. We reclaimed the soul of this place. They didn't just lose control. We found something better. Each other. Now, every time I drive through that entrance, no gate, no passcode, no silent judgment, I feel something deeper than pride. I feel peace, the kind that comes from knowing you didn't just defend your home, you helped others see what it means to truly have one. And once a month, when neighbors gather in my barn for chili and cornbread, when the kids chase chickens and the music plays a little too loud, I lean back in that old rocking chair and whisper, "You'd be proud, Liz. You really would." Because in the end, the fence they tried to build wasn't strong enough to stop the roots we'd already planted. And no matter how slick their plans or shiny their gates, some things just don't get bulldozed. Community, after all, grows where truth is finally allowed to breathe. And that's the thing, isn't it? They built a gate to keep me out, but ended up unlocking something much bigger. Not just access, not just justice, but connection. We started with a power-hungry HOA and a grieving old man with a ranch. What we got was a quiet reminder that when you stand your ground, calmly, wisely, with your facts in order, you don't just protect your home, you protect the soul of the neighborhood. You remind folks that community isn't built on rules or gates or newsletters. It's built on respect, truth, and the courage to say, "Not today." You see, this story wasn't just about me reclaiming a road. It was about rebuilding something broken without throwing a single punch. It's proof that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you stand up for while you're still here. We didn't just fix a legal mess. We cleared a path for chickens, neighbors, and second chances. And if that gate ever taught me anything, it's this. The things people build to divide us often become the very things that bring us together when the truth finally gets the mic. So if this story hit you somewhere, if you've ever dealt with a Patricia or watched someone like Greg count on folks staying silent, do me a favor, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Because stories like this, they happen everywhere. And if you believe in justice with a little wit, community with a little kick, and underdogs with the facts on their side, like this video, subscribe to the channel and don't miss what's coming next. Because I promise you, this wasn't the last gate that needed opening. And we're just getting started.